What's up, Flannelverse? We are back. We are ready for week 14. Really important week in season-long leagues, best ball leagues, typically the end of the regular season here. We have 6 teams on bye for this week, but none of that matters for tonight. We are just focusing on the showdown slate. We have Green Bay at Detroit. Don't have to worry about the cold weather in Green Bay for this one. We'll be in a dome in Detroit. Should be a fun game. While you're coming in, if you haven't already done so, please do like the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, I am trying to get to 5,000 subscribers on this channel by the end of the NFL season. Have a little bit more than 1,100 left to go. If I get over 3,900 tonight, I would be happy with that number. So if you could, give me a subscribe, like, comment, all of that, very helpful to the algorithm. I will be going position by position, starting with quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defense, kickers. I will then take a brief look at FanDuel also. And then after looking at FanDuel, I'll play around with some lineups on DraftKings, take any remaining questions that you have. Of course, feel free to ask questions throughout the show. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Good to see you all here. Congrats, Exumian, for being first, putting in max lineups of 20 and 10 in another. Am I just super stupid to play all 3 main running backs in one lineup? I don't think that's stupid. Tokyo Swan thinks the Lions going to get routed tonight. I don't know. I kind of doubt that at home. Maybe. Could happen. They didn't do that well against the Bears. All right. Yeah, Sean, for those of you who are not on Twitter, X, the socials, Adam and I probably not doing that show going forward. I am talking to somebody else right now about potentially a new guest on the morning show. That's one I'm not going to do on my own because I do the evening show. So like, I'm not going to go do the same show twice where it's just me talking about it. I do have a potential new guest to start doing the early show again. But Adam's just too busy with NBA. We're not actually feuding, as I said we were on Twitter. No, Adam and I are not feuding. He's just super busy with NBA and some other things. So we're not doing that show going forward. But I might be starting with a new guest potentially next week. We just kind of right before the show started talking about it. So we'll see when that comes in. Sean, if you want a Fantasy Points hat, you can find it. Go to fantasypoints.com. I believe, like, look at the top somewhere. There's a menu where there is a store for the Fantasy Points. What's up, Shady Advice? Good to see Shady in here. I'll be hanging out with Shady next week in Nashville for the Fantasy Football World Champion, where he is going to be competing for like $2.5 million, and I'm just going to be a guest. All right, we're going to start. We're going to start here. Quarterbacks, and I'm going to start at captain, looking at the ownership. Actually, I'm going to refresh real quick. I believe these quarterbacks project really similarly here at Fantasy Points, both projecting for about 18 fantasy points. All right, I've refreshed on Roto Grinders. I think that'll do it. Yeah. Jared Goff coming in yet. Projection of about 18 fantasy points. Jordan Love just under 18. So pretty similar in terms of projection. Both projected for single-digit ownership at captain. Goff at about 9%. Jordan Love at about 9.5%. I'll start with the Goff side because he projects a little bit better. I think 9% feels pretty good. I think I'll probably be right with the field there. 45.5 in the flex. Also, this is, there are often slates where I'm willing to fade the quarterbacks because I don't think there's going to be a ton of scoring. Like if there's not a lot of scoring, it's hard for the quarterbacks to get there because they're pretty reliant on a lot of yards, touchdowns, etc. They can't rack up PPR points. I think this one could be a high scoring game since it's in a dome. 2 pretty good defenses, so it's not like a sure thing, but I'm willing to bet on this being a pretty high scoring game. So I am definitely willing to play both quarterbacks here. And yeah, so like 54% total ownership going to Goff, 54-55. I think I'm probably going to be right with the field there. Maybe I come down off it if I need to get to some more of other players, but I think I probably end up pretty close to that number. I'll have to see where there are spots that I want to be underweight to the field, because that feels like one that I'm just going to be eating it. I'm going to be right with the field on Jared Goff. Most likely would be where I'd like to be, at least in both captain and in the flex. Jordan Love, 43% flex ownership in the captain spot. Jordan Love coming in at 9.5% ownership. So pretty similar. And again, I think I'm probably going to be right with the field on that one. I'm realizing I usually remember to check inactives when there's something specific I'm looking out for. I think we basically have all of the news that we have been expecting. But let me just double check to make sure that is the case. We have, for people who don't know, Romeo Doubs out for this one. We've known that for a while. Khalif Raymond, I'm fairly certain was already ruled out, but I want to just double check these things. Yeah, Jair Alexander out for the Packers, so the defense gets a little bit easier. Romeo Doubs out for the Packers. And then on the Lions side, just double checking. We have several defensive players out for the Lions, so it's a tough matchup on paper. Maybe it gets a little bit easier with several players out for the Lions. DJ Reader out. Several defensive players. Khalif Raymond not listed inactive. Is he on the IR or something? I'm pretty sure he's out, but let me just double check that. Should have known this. I've just been assuming that he's out. All right, Twitter not being very helpful. Let's see. I'm going to check chat because some of you usually. Oh, he is on the IR. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Okay, that's what I thought. I was like, I'm pretty sure he's out, but not on active. So just had to double check that. Okay, good. We are good to go. I'm going to continue. Don't have much more to say about the quarterbacks. They're both coming in a little over 50% owned, both coming in single digit owned in the captain spot. If I get to 10% each at captain, I would be totally fine with that, even if I end up slightly overweight to the field. I think they both look really good. I think with the defenses a little bit banged up, they should be able to have some success through the air. It's in a dome. A lot of things look good for the passing games. So I'll probably try to match the field around 55% on the quarterbacks. Not usually a spot where I take a huge stand unless there is, an obvious situation where, what was it? Aiden O'Connell the other week, where it was like he was projected for 40% ownership, came in significantly lower, which I was kind of anticipating for that one. Sometimes you get those situations where it's like, I don't think the field is going to get on this quarterback, or if you have like any elite rushing quarterback, sometimes they'll be overweight to the field. This just feels like a spot where the field is probably going to be about where I want to be with the quarterbacks. As far as stacking goes, I want to always stack my quarterbacks. Neither of them has much rushing upside. So I'm always stacking, and in the captain spot, I would prefer to have at least 2 pass catchers with the quarterbacks. And I think my general rule there, and this is totally not based on any kind of math or like looking at historical data, but the general way I play it is when I'm doing quarterback in the captain spot requiring multiple pass catchers, I do include the running backs as in that group that can be included as pass catchers. When I'm doing quarterback in the flex, I don't include the running back, with some exceptions. Just because I don't think like it's likely for one of these quarterbacks to get there with just the running back, because these aren't like super involved running backs. But I think if you include the running back, maybe they get the fluke touchdown. It feels a little bit better to me. So I include the running backs as pass catchers when I have the quarterback at captain, not when I have the quarterback at flex. But that's really not based on anything other than sort of my intuition. So that's one of those things that probably should be tested. But that's the way I play it. Okay. And as far as the matchups go, let's take a look at it. And I like to look at it through the lens of the last 5 weeks, because we see things change, and as I already noted, like we have some injuries here that could impact things a bit. But here's my notes. The Packers defense has allowed the 8th fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. Again, no Jair Alexander tonight, which helps a bit. Lions defense has allowed the 6th fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. Also a pretty banged up defense. So I think both these defensive matchups maybe slightly better than they look on paper, but on paper, not great matchups for either of these quarterbacks. That's going to be kind of the theme though throughout here, is I don't think we really have any awesome spots for any positions. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think it's generally like on paper, tough matchups across the board, made a little bit easier. So my general takeaway is not really concerning myself that much with the matchups, but there are some spots that I'll talk about as we go. All right, moving on to running backs. Josh Jacobs, I believe, is the top projected. Let me double check this. Yep, top projected running back on the slate. He's 9,800. Jacobs coming in the captain spot at 11% ownership. In the flex, Jacobs coming in at 34% ownership, so sub 50% ownership overall. You'll also note here, just like looking at the prices here, nobody's super expensive on the slate. We don't have anybody, 11,000, 12,000 that you really want to need to fit in there. And we have some value on here. So you can get to Jacobs pretty easily if you want to. He's coming in sub 50% owned. It's not a great matchup for Jacobs. Again, on paper, Detroit just all year has been awesome against running backs. Bottom four matchup for running backs against Detroit. But as I noted, there are some injuries to the defensive line on Detroit. It gets a little bit easier than maybe than you typically see against Detroit. So Jacobs, fine. I do have some concern that he's had 45 carries over the past two games. I guess this one he does have a little bit more of a break than he did in the last one. Actually, I'm going to pull up the Coach Speak Index Discord. I think generally the coach speak has been positive. Like they think they can continue relying on Jacobs. So I'm not, giving him any kind of a reduction in role in like my expectations for Josh. I'm not doing projections, but if I were doing projections, I don't think that I would be docking the role at all for Josh Jacobs. They've said some things in recent weeks that kind of make you think that maybe they want to limit him a little bit. On the 29th, head coach Matt LaFleur said there's probably only one guy in the league that could handle nearly 50 touches in 5 days, and they Josh Jacobs in parentheses there. That's in again the Coach Speak Index Discord if you want to check it out. He said I kept asking him if he was good, and he said I feel great. He's a dude. I love the way he plays. I love what he's all about. I think he brings a different dimension to us. Just that physicality. I don't know how many broken tackles he had yesterday, but it sure seemed like a lot. Yeah, they love Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs probably going to have a pretty strong role once again here. I don't really think they're going to do anything to limit his role here, and his role has been really strong. Again, we can go to the bell cow report for Josh Jacobs and just look at his game log here. Last week, 19 carries, 4 targets on 46% route participation. The week prior to that, 26 carries, 1 target on 16% route participation. I don't know what happened there where he only had 16% route participation. I'm trying to remember, was that a snow game, the San Francisco Packers game? The game prior to that, 5 targets on 60% route participation. So just kind of a blip there where he only ran 16% of the routes, and he had 18 carries. And just an awesome role for Josh Jacobs, the clear number one running back for the Packers. Ultimately, again, I don't really see myself getting too far off the field. The field coming in around 45%. Jacob's not, one of my top priorities at captain. So maybe I come in a little bit underweight to 11%, but I think he's a really strong play at captain and at flex. I will probably just kind of eat the ownership on Jacobs. So far have not found a single where I'm really too different from where the field is in terms of what I want to do. Probably gonna eat it. As far as the other Packers running backs, sort of hard to get much of a read on Emmanuel Wilson or Chris Brooks. Neither getting much. Actually, I'm looking in the captain. Here. Let me look in the flex. Emmanuel Wilson coming in 5% projected ownership in the flex. Chris Brooks coming in 9% projected ownership. If you look at their roles in recent weeks, let's see. Okay, so this and actually, let me just I'm going to separate just since the buy, because this is the numbers that I used. Sort of just how do you choose your sample size here? But I thought didn't look that different since the buy to me since than it looked prior to the buy. But just to kind of give you an idea of what the roles look like for the backup running backs. Chris Brooks in the 3 games since the bye, 7 carries, 5 targets on 28.8% route participation. Emmanuel Wilson, 13 carries, 0 targets on 5.5% route participation. So Brooks, like kind of clearly the passing back for the Packers, and they use Jacobs to some extent as a passing back, but they're not really giving Emmanuel Wilson any kind of passing game role. They're using Chris Brooks a good amount in the passing game, 29% route participation, 5 targets in 3 games. Not a great role, but like he has a passing game role, whereas Wilson, 13 carries in 3 games, little over 4 carries per game, whereas Brooks is getting about 2 carries per game. So then it kind of comes down to ownership for me, and Wilson getting just 5%. And it's also hard to know who has more contingent upside. Like to me, you just that those numbers, I would prefer to get to Chris Brooks for the passing game involvement like that. It's easier to rack up fantasy points when you are involved in the passing game. So you just look at those numbers. I slight preference for Chris Brooks. I sort of suspect that Emmanuel Wilson has the more contingent ups than Brooks, and he's cheaper and he's getting less ownership. So I think I probably am close to the field on Chris Brooks if he comes in at 9%. But I don't know. Maybe I meet in the middle. Maybe I get to about 7, 8% of both. I think I'd like to be 5% on Emmanuel Wilson just because he is $2,000. I think he probably has more contingent upside than Chris Brooks does, and he has some role already, and could just like randomly score a touchdown. So I think both are kind of fine, not huge priorities, but I think 5% on Wilson is a number that I would like to be overweight on, just because I do think that he most likely has the more contingent upside, just based on his usage in the running game. Like I think that's um, I think Brooks probably stays more in his role, but I'm sort of just guessing there. Um, all right, and then outside of so then on the other side we have, I don't think there's nobody else on Green Bay we need to think about playing. On Detroit, I'm probably mostly just playing Gibbs and Montgomery. I don't think I need to go to Reynolds or Sion at all here. I don't think either has had any kind of role. I guess we can look at the um, recent game log for the Packers. Yeah, the past last week, nobody got a carry outside of Gibbs or Montgomery. The week prior, Sion played 1 snap. Greg Reynolds played 3 snaps. Most often, I'm not going to see a ton of Vaki or Reynolds. This Jaguars game may be an exception because it was a complete blowout. I don't really think we're expecting a blowout here, so tough to really want to get to anybody outside of Gibbs and Montgomery, in part because, again, like I don't think anybody really has much contingent upside outside of those two. If Montgomery goes down, it's probably just more Gibbs and vice versa. So I don't really need to worry that much about Vaki or Reynolds. But Gibbs and Montgomery both obviously going to look great. They are the second and third projected running backs on the slate, and two of the better projected plays on the slate overall. You just sort by fantasy points here. Gibbs fifth, Montgomery sixth in terms of projection. Gibbs 9,000 projected for. We'll start with the Gibbs side. Projected for 39% ownership at flex. At captain, Gibbs is projected for 10% ownership. I'm sort of inclined to be overweight on both. I like Gibbs. I think Gibbs looks pretty great here. The role is strong for Gibbs. Now you can ask yourself the question. Actually, before I change this number, I want to see if the roles have changed at all in recent weeks. Nope, looks just like every other week, where it's like they are completely even in how they are used, more or less. You think of it as being Gibbs the passing game back, Montgomery the running back, and there's like a shade of truth to it, but really they both are pretty similar in terms of their usage on the season. Montgomery 166 carries to Gibbs's 163. Montgomery 29 targets to Gibbs's 34. Gibbs is running more routes, but again, it has not really resulted in more targets for Gibbs. So pretty similar roles for the two running backs. You look at the ownership numbers. I listed Gibbs as like one of my favorite captains everywhere today. And now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, Montgomery's really coming in lower owned than Gibbs across the board, and he's cheaper. And I'm kind of getting more and more intrigued by Montgomery as I look at these numbers. Kind of want to be overweight to Montgomery, and maybe I just kind of, you know, eat 50% ownership on Gibbs and try to match it with Montgomery, get overweight to the field there. So I think he looks great. You also have the narrative. I want to see if anybody's brought it up in chat yet. The Gibbs posted a TikTok or something, and in the background was like plays of the Lions and kind of in the doghouse. I think maybe potentially in the doghouse for Gibbs. I don't really think I'm doing anything with that. I don't think that that this is a spot where I'm expecting Gibbs to be punished at all. I think he's going to have his typical role, but there's a chance that I just don't think Dan Campbell is the type of coach that would be inclined to punish Gibbs or anything like that. But there's some chance that we see Gibbs maybe take the first drive off, give the first drive to Montgomery, or the first quarter or something like that. There is some chance of that. Um, Dan Campbell says, sorry. Dan Campbell said he doesn't care. They should win anyway. Yeah, I did not see him say anything about caring or not caring. I think what I saw was like, oh, we'll talk about that in house. But regardless, I would be pretty surprised if he factored into their game plan at all. I think he's just trying to win the game. So I'm not really factoring that in. But honestly, like just look at it. They have pretty similar usage. Montgomery is cheaper. Gibbs getting more ownership. And obviously there's another factor here, which is efficiency and ability to just break off a huge play, and clearly Gibbs has that ability. So I get it why people want to go more to to Gibbs than Montgomery. But I'm going to be playing a good amount of both. Got a super chat here from Sal Vetri. Good to see Sal in chat. Appreciate it. Says, have an awesome night, man. Keep crushing it. You too, Sal. I know you've been crushing the YouTube game, so I appreciate that from Sal. Yeah, I really don't have any issue playing them together. I think I actually am going to force myself to play both Gibbs and Montgomery in some lineups together. I think that's a way I've basically done it every single Lions showdown slate. I'm playing both of the Lions in the same lineup because it's a way that I don't think the field does it quite as much as they should. This is, again, something that I have not back tested to see if the field is scared of playing Lions backs together. But clearly they can hit, even if you think the field is going to do it a good amount. Like, they're just two strong plays together. You're kind of making the bet on Detroit's game plan being, let's just run it down their throats. And they're certainly capable of doing that with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So I like playing both. I think you can play, even if you have one of them at captain, if you have Gibbs at captain, you can still include Montgomery in the flex or vice versa. No issue with that. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. I guess we can take a look at the matchups. Yeah, that is true. Mateo says they both average 15, 20 points per game, but 75% of the time it limits their ceilings. We have not seen them do like what the Dolphins did last year, where they put up like 99 combined points with their two running backs. But I think they're capable. If they decide to just continue running it, they could. But again, we saw like they had the perfect game script for running it out against the Jaguars. They got up big early, and they just continued throwing it throughout the second half. Although I was pointed out in one of the shows I was on that there was a lot of like yak stuff going on in that game. So maybe it wasn't like their plan to just continue throwing throughout the game. It just happened to be they'd throw it for 10 yards and then the receiver would take it for another 50. So it just happened to look like, wow, they're running up the score, but really it was the receiver. So I do think like they're probably more inclined, if they get ahead, to continue to run. Packers defense has allowed the 15th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to running backs. So very middling matchup for these Detroit running backs. But they're talented. They've got a really strong offensive line. I am. Chase says, are you worried about the O-line for the Lions being banked up? Yes, but also they are probably still really good. And yeah, I'm not that concerned about it. Tokyo Swan says no one wants to run the ball on a short week, but they played on Thanksgiving, so it's been a full week since. So no short week for them on this Thursday Night Football. It's a rare full week in between on a Thursday Night Football, so I'm not concerned about that. I mean, yeah, it's a concern that the offensive line is banged up. The matchup is fine, but they get like they're just such a good offense. I think they're going to be able to continue to run without any huge issue. So yes, both running backs look pretty strong to me. I do, because every other piece of content I've done this today has been in on Gibbs. I'm like disinclined to say that, like, now that I look at these numbers, kind of Montgomery looks more intriguing to me since he's only getting 37% ownership and he's cheaper. Whereas Gibbs is getting like 50%. But I think that the more I look at it, the more I'm like, that kind of does stand out. But yeah, so I'm probably just going to be with the field on Gibbs. I think I probably do end up overweight to the field on Montgomery. So far I have not found a single player that I'm going to be underweight to. So I'll have to think about that as I go on, who I might be willing to sacrifice to get more of other players. But I'm not probably getting to any Reynolds or Vaki, but I think that does it for the running backs. Let's move on, look at some wide receivers. Get rid of this bot here. All right. Oh, and I have not moved this down. There we go. Okay. Yeah, already says Lions injuries don't bother me. They're just that good. Yeah, that's the thing. They're a really good team. Okay. Um, wide receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown, best projection of the receivers on the slate. Does he have the best projection of anybody? Yes, he does. Highest projection on the slate. He's the only player that is over 10,000. 38.5% projected ownership in the flex. At captain, Amon-Ra coming in at 15% ownership. Really like strong role. Really hard to poke too many holes in Amon-Ra St. Brown's role on the team. 92 targets in 12 games, 31% air yard share, 83.8% route participation, 26% target share. Everything looks great for Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is an elite receiver. What's he averaging on the season? 18 PPR fantasy points per game for Amon-Ra St. Brown. No Jair Alexander. So if you were at all worried about Jair Alexander coverage, you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, he looks great. Let's see. Packers defense has allowed the fifth fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the past 5 weeks. But again, no Jair Alexander. You can only choose players from one game. I'm not that worried about the coverage for Amon-Ra. I will say, let's look at the wide receiver coverage matrix. I thought this was a pretty interesting one to look at on this slate. By this, it is not the best matchup for Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's a much better matchup in terms of coverage grade for Jameson Williams and Tim Patrick. The Packers play very, very little man defense. They play a lot of zone, which seems to benefit Jameson Williams and Tim Patrick more than Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that is worth noting, but still like not a terrible matchup for Amon-Ra St. Brown. If you look for expected fantasy points per route run, still Amon-Ra leading the group, not by that much over Jameson Williams. So it is, kind of a boost to Jameson Williams, but just gets him closer to Amon-Ra St. Brown in terms of expected fantasy points per route run. And then in terms of like how many routes run are we expecting? I guess not that many fewer for JMO. JMO at 79% on the year to Amon-Ra's 84% route participation, but some fewer routes, and then fewer expected fantasy points per route. But my overall takeaway is I think Amon-Ra might be the one that I do sacrifice a little bit to get to others, just because he's getting 15% captain ownership. He's getting 38.5% flex ownership. I don't want to sacrifice too much because he clearly has like the ability to absolutely break a slate. Yeah, maybe I take it back. Like he's getting about 53%. I think I might rather sacrifice the quarterbacks than Amon-Ra, since they're getting higher owned. Yeah, I think that's probably where I end up is that I'd be more likely to sacrifice some of my quarterback exposure rather than sacrificing because he's getting 53%. Maybe I come in at 50% Amon-Ra and come in just slightly under on each of Amon-Ra and each of the quarterbacks. But yeah, I'd like to play him. He's not somebody that I'm trying to take a huge overweight stance on. Like I can't see any reason to think that I want to be playing 80% Amon-Ra. It's not the best matchup in the world. He's expensive, but hard to poke too many holes in Amon-Ra. I'll probably try to get to around 50% there. On Detroit, beyond Amon-Ra, I mean, obviously JMO looks great. He is 7,000, so much cheaper than Amon-Ra. As we just saw, the coverage matchup looks great for JMO. The ownership, JMO coming in at, where are we at? So 30% ownership. So he's, only 7,000 coming in at 30% ownership looks pretty good. At captain, JMO coming in at, I keep looking for Jameson, but they list him as Jay Williams. 6% ownership. I like JMO at captain. Just clearly has that, kind of boom bust profile. So he's cheap. The matchup looks good. He's not getting a ton of captain ownership. He is kind of a fun contrarian captain, where I do think I probably come in overweight on 6%. So again, probably need to find places where I'm going to be underweight. I think I probably come in a little bit underweight on 15% Amon-Ra, and come in a little bit over on JMO would be my expectation, or at least I should say my goal. Like I would like to come in a little bit overweight on JMO, both at captain and in the flex. I think he looks like a really strong play. Love the matchup. Everything looks good there. Beyond Amon-Ra and JMO, Tim Patrick. So again, we have no Khalif Raymond in this game. So Tim Patrick should see a little bit of an expanded role for Detroit. And we can just look at the recent game log for the Lions to see what to expect here. So we didn't have Khalif Raymond in the game last week, so we have some idea of what to expect. In that game, we had Tim Patrick up to 64% route participation, 3 targets in the game. Allen Robinson, 11% route participation, didn't see a target in the game. So Tim Patrick, clearly the biggest beneficiary when Khalif Raymond is out. Here we can look at this is the route participation report in the data suite. Tim Patrick, so he had declined to 38% route participation in week 12 with Khalif Raymond running 20% of routes and then back up to 64%. So I think we can probably expect, closer to this 65% range for Tim Patrick. Probably see a handful of targets. Again, look good in terms of the matchup, the coverage matrix here. Coverage grade, he was the second best of the leading receivers for the Lions, plus 7.3%. Coverage grade does better in zone on the season. So I think Tim Patrick looks like a pretty strong play. I wouldn't expect more than 4 targets in the game for Tim Patrick, but I believe he's seen some end zone targets. Not seen it here, but yeah, I think he's a pretty strong play who's not getting a ton of ownership. Coming in at 16% ownership in the flex. He's only 3,400. Should see an expanded role. Yeah, I think Tim Patrick looks like a player that I'm definitely going to be overweight on. I'm not going to be like 50% Tim Patrick, but I'll probably get to 25, 30% Tim Patrick. He's just, kind of cheap and has a pretty strong role here. Sub 2% at captain. I'm not really probably going to play him at captain. If the opto gives me some, I'll probably accept it, but not a priority for me to play Tim Patrick at captain. And then the other receivers on Detroit, if you want to play like Allen Robinson, I think that's fine. I would not have any big expectations for Allen Robinson. Again, just 4 routes run last week. Didn't see a target. I don't think he's really had much of a role at all this year. Yeah, he caps out at 9 routes run and 1 target in week 8. So, he's basically you're hoping for a touchdown. Probably not going to have much of a role. If you get the touchdown, you'll probably want him, but definitely not enthusiastic about playing much Allen Robinson. I'd rather just go to Tim Patrick. And let's see here. I mean, if this is right, 1% owned, then I guess I would be enthusiastic about a 1% owned Allen Robinson. Let me double check where other places are. See if we're getting a little bit more in some other places in terms of projected ownership. Let's see. Have to imagine we are. Nobody's really giving him any ownership. So I think he's a strong dart throw. Like we not expecting much from him in terms of usage, but if he scores a touchdown, you will be psyched to have Allen Robinson. He's also 1,000. He's not min priced. So I'm not enthusiastic about it from the standpoint of I don't really see him having much of a role, but could with Khalif Raymond out, maybe he has more of a opportunity to see an expanded role. If one of the receivers in front of him gets hurt, then maybe like he now is like 1 step away from having a bigger role, and he's only getting 1% ownership. So I think he looks good at 1% owned. I will make sure I have a couple shares there just in case something happens. And then I don't think there's any other. Yeah, Khalif Raymond is out. So I think that does it for the Detroit wide receivers. On the Packers side, Jayden Reed is their star receiver, 7,600. I think he has like 8 carries on the year. I looked that up to see if it was something I needed to worry about, but not enough that we really needed to talk much about the carries. He had like in week 1, I think he had a breakaway carry for a ton of yards and a touchdown. He can do that. Like they do manufacture some, but again, I think he has like 8 carries on the year, so not something to get too excited about with Jayden Reed, but 33% ownership at flex for Reed, at captain coming in at 8% ownership. I think both those numbers look pretty strong to me. You'll see that I'll bring up the coverage matrix in a second here, but there's he's not the one that really stands out to me from a coverage standpoint, but just from a role standpoint, Jayden Reed has a pretty strong role. 58 targets in 12 games. Not the strongest role. I don't want to oversell that. 58 targets in 12 games for Jayden Reed. Not like he's an Amon-Ra St. Brown. 71% route participation. I think he's got the talent. The ownership is low enough that I probably match the field. 8% captain ownership feels about right to me. Not something that I'm trying to get way over the field there. 33% flex ownership. I'll take that. It was only a little bit more expensive than JMO, getting slightly more ownership. I think he's the better real life receiver, probably. So I think I probably eat the ownership on Jayden Reed. I don't think that's a spot where I really want to get too much overweight to the field there. But the one that stands out from a coverage standpoint, and I can not have any team listed here because you just look at what's going on here. This is Christian Watson, best coverage grade of any wide receiver on the entire week. This is an elite matchup for Christian Watson, according to the wide receiver coverage matchups page at Fantasy Points. This is something that throughout the day, I've become more and more interested in Christian Watson. If you're playing pick six, I think the line is like 50.5 receiving yards. I took the over on that. I think this looks like a really strong spot for Christian Watson. No Romeo Dobbs. The role has been pretty strong. So he's one that I have gotten more and more enthusiastic about throughout the day. The more I've looked at the slate, he looks better and better. 75% route participation last week. Is that a season high? Looks like it second ties for the second best route participation on the season for Christian Watson. Not seeing a ton of targets, just three or four per game. I know he dropped a big one. Was that last week or 2 weeks ago? I don't know. He can drop those long bombs, but he's getting open. He is seeing strong route participation. This is an ideal matchup for Christian Watson. The ownership is pretty low, 26.5% projected ownership at flex for Christian Watson, at captain coming in at 4%. Those are both numbers that I want to be overweight on, particularly at captain. 4% seems really low to me on Christian Watson. That's definitely a number that I'll probably try to be double the field or so on Watson. I think he looks really good. Yeah, low numbers there. Low ownership numbers. The matchup seems great. The targets again. I mean, if you look at the full season for Christian Watson, not the strongest, just 37 targets in 11 games on 51.7% route participation. But I think that includes some games where he has been. I was including Christian Kirk there. So let's see. So yeah, 75% last week is his best route participation of the season. I had not filtered that out correctly. Couple games in there, 6-7 targets. Last week we did not see. We only saw 3 targets, even with Romeo Dobbs up. But clearly there's higher upside for more targets for Christian Watson. They probably need to throw a lot in this game to keep up with Detroit. He did see 7 targets in the last game against Detroit in Week 9. So that's worth noting. Like they did throw to him more in the last game against Detroit. Everything looks great to me for Christian Watson. That's definitely a spot that I will be taking an overweight stand, more of a priority for me. Let me see if I had any other notes on Christian Watson. Yeah, I guess just past 3 games, 10 targets on 70% route participation. He's only 6,600. Yeah, I think everything looks great for Christian Watson. It's tough because we have a lot of like pretty strong plays at wide receiver in particular today. But across the board, really, we have a lot of pretty strong plays. So it's hard to go like way overweight on anybody, but I think I'll be pretty significantly overweight on Christian Watson, and particularly at captain, I'll be at least double the field. All right, let's see. Daniels wants to know thoughts on Max 1, Jacobs or Love. They're 9,400, 9,000. Feels like you want Detroit skill guys. Either Green Bay runs with Jacobs or Love chucks it because they're losing. Um, yeah, if you want to set that rule, I wouldn't do it in a 150 set because, you could have a receiving touchdown for Jacobs. It's certainly possible for both of them to get there. But like if you're playing a 20 lineup set and you want to set that rule, I think that's a reasonable rule to set. Um, Again, probably not a rule that I'm setting, but not one that I'm like that I see it and I think you shouldn't do that. I think that's a totally fine rule if that's one you want to try, that you want to set. Would you ever make a lineup without any quarterbacks? Yeah, absolutely. Including today. Like there are certain slates where I definitely would, but even in this one, um, I'd be willing to because you have enough like strong receiver options, running back options. Definitely willing to play some lineups without any quarterbacks. Man, I'm scrolling up trying to catch up here. I All right. I'm not gonna be able to get to scroll all the way up for all the questions. So if you have questions, and I have not gotten to them, feel free to ask them again. I'm just gonna scroll down and start. Uh, See if we have any other questions as we're going. All right. If something happens, either running back, the other will go nuts. Yeah, for the Detroit guys, agree with that. Let's see. All right. Going to get back to it in a second here. Patrick or Brooks? Tim Patrick for me. Brooks, I mean, has strong like contingent upside, but Tim Patrick has more standalone value, I'd say. Is a kneel down, spelled Neil, Neil, considered a rush attempt? Um, that's funny. Dan says kneel down is considered an impossibility. That's right. Thank you, Easy. Read a captain. Yeah, totally reasonable play. All right, let's see. Just catching up with some questions. I'll continue on with my Packers wide receiver discussion in a second here. All right. Cool. I'm trying to be quick here. All right, got to get back to it. Okay. Back to receivers for the Packers, and I'll pull up the Packers wide receiver matrix here so we can see all of them. But yeah, awesome role here for Christian Watson. None of the other Packers have elite roles. Romeo Doubs again is out for this game, so this would be Dontavian Wicks. And I looked it up. What have they done in the past games with Romeo Doubs out, and that was weeks 5 and 13. So I'll just pull that up here for the Packers receivers for our sample size with no Doubs. In those games, it's really just been the Dontavian Wicks show for the most part in terms of taking on a role here. It looks here, if you look at these numbers, it looks like Heath also saw a big bump, but he did play in week 13. So this was just, it only lists him as being in for one game here, but he was actually in for, so that he had 62.1% route participation in week 5. In week 6, he just didn't run any routes. So it doesn't register as a game in the data suite here. But it would be, he ran 0% route participation in week 13. Like they clearly tried him out in week 5, gave him 62.1% route participation. He saw 2 targets in that game. So this is all just stats from week 5. And then in week 6, he was active. He was healthy, and they just didn't use him at all. So kind of hard to know what to make of that with Malik Heath. Because I want to think like, oh, is he the one who's getting the benefit instead of Bo Melton? But it was Bo Melton last week who actually saw the bigger benefit with Romeo Doubs out. Bo Melton has seen in the 2 games with Romeo Doubs out 28.1% route participation, 2 targets overall. I guess we can pull up the game log here for the Packers and just see last week again. Heath not showing up because he didn't run a route, but Bo Melton last week, 28% route. So it's been pretty consistent, right at 28% route participation and 1 target in the 2 games with no Romeo Doubs. I think both are like Heath and Bo Melton. I think my preference would be Bo Melton just because he played last week in this same and he ran 28% of routes, saw a target. He's only 1,200. I think he looks pretty good. Heath is a total wild card. I think a fine dart throw, but he's really just a dart throw. Again, did not run a single route. I think he played one snap last week and didn't see a target. He's 600. If you want to take a dart throw and just say, well, what if he does get back to maybe there's something weird going on that we don't know about. What if he does get back to the week 5 usage or like even like half of that? Suddenly he would look great at 3% ownership at 600. So I think he's a fine dart throw, but he's really just a dart throw. We have no indication that they want to give Malik Heath any kind of role here, whereas Bo Melton has run 28% of routes in both the games. That Dobbs is out. He's 1,200. I think 10% ownership to Bo Melton is probably fine. Not a number that I'm like, I need to be triple the field, but I probably come in a little bit overweight to 10% on Bo Melton just because of the price tag. And it wouldn't be that surprising to see him spike a little bit more than the 28%, particularly because Dontavian Wicks has had issues with drops. So it's possible that they just get tired of it and say, hey, let's throw Bo Melton out there a little bit more instead. So I think I probably come in over 10% there, but I'm not like super enthusiastic about it. I think most likely he's still sub 30% route participation, only sees a target or two. So you're kind of hoping for a touchdown. And then Dontavian Wicks is, so again, Dontavian Wicks, the biggest beneficiary of the games that Romeo Dobbs is out. He is averaging 63% route participation in those games, has 11 targets in those games. So really strong target share in the games where Dobbs is out. He's great at getting separation. Again, just having major issues with drops. So I don't know. Are you concerned about the drops with Dontavian Wicks? Sure. I'm a little bit concerned that Dontavian Wicks continues to have drop issues, but if he's going to be reasonably owned, which I believe last I looked, he's coming in pretty reasonable ownership. Yeah, 29% ownership. That's actually that's come up a little bit from what I was seeing earlier in the day. But he's a pretty clear like wide receiver 3 here for the Packers, and you can make a case like just looking at the target stuff, like he's arguably the wide receiver 2 here. Just looking at the targets in games, like he's tied with Tucker Kraft with 11 targets, second most targets on the team in games with Romeo Dobbs out. Christian Watson only has 3 targets in those games. Again, I really like Christian Watson here, and Christian Watson, I guess, missed one of those games. Okay, so that's what's going on. That's why. All right, I totally missed that. Christian Watson was out in week 5. Must have been. Hang on. Yeah, I missed this. Okay, Christian Watson was out in week 5 as well as Romeo Dobbs. That's why we had Malik Heath run 62% of the routes. And then last week with Watson back, Heath was out. Melton still had a role. Okay, that all makes a lot more sense now. Okay. So ultimately though, both of those games, Dontavian Wicks, 64% route participation in week 13, 62% in week 5. Bo Melton actually was down to 14%. I didn't realize that. He was 41% in week 5, 14% in week 13. So Bo Melton looking not as great as I was thinking there. Just 14% route participation last week. Again, Malik Heath did not run a route. He did play a snap, so he was healthy. So Bo Melton, slight preference there, but yeah, it's these numbers are not that promising. It is basically just Wicks taking on that role. I'm glad I saw that there on Watson. I totally missed that earlier that he had just one game with Romeo Dobbs out. So that is worth noting. Yeah, Melton and Heath are both just entire dart throws. But if Melton's getting 10% ownership, honestly, now looking at that, I'm not that inclined to get over 10%. I might still get there, but that's not great usage last week. Okay. Continuing on, I think that's it for the Packers receivers. Let's see. We talked about Reed looks pretty strong. Watson looks awesome to me. Wicks, because he's 4,200. The ownership has come up, but I still think I'm willing to eat it. And actually, I want to look at Wicks captain ownership, because if he's not going to get captain ownership, that's pretty intriguing. He's getting 6% captain ownership. So the ownership overall has come up enough on Wicks that I'm still going to play some, but I'm not as enthusiastic as I was earlier in the day. That's kind of 32% ownership going to Wicks. I'll probably be with the field there, maybe even a little bit overweight to the field because he is only 4,200. So the price is still right. Again, 11 targets in the 2 games without Dobbs. I guess I should double check the games. Did he get as many last week? Yeah, so we had 6 targets in week 5 with both Watson and Dobbs out. Still saw 5 targets last week with Christian Watson back. So I think he's good at separating. He just needs to hold on to the ball and it'll look good. So I think 32% owned. I probably still come in overweight to the field on, or 33%. No, 30. He's getting 29% ownership in the flex and 6%. So he's coming in 35% owned. I'm probably with the field on Dontavian Wicks. Now that his ownership has come up, I'm probably just right there, not taking any huge stand there. Yeah, Melton Heath just total dart throws. And I think that's it as far as Green Bay receivers go. Yep. All right, so I will move on to tight ends and check in on any questions. All right. Scrolling up a little bit, I've missed some questions. Oh, we've got the bots are out. Even with the subscriber only mode, apparently the bots know how to get through. All right. Yeah, appreciate that call out, Dan. Yeah, please do like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe if you have not done so. Again, gonna have a tough time getting to 5,000 if I don't do those morning shows going forward. But maybe I will, hopefully with a new guest. What's up, Tim? Good to see you. All right, I am. Somebody said not seeing a lot of Tucker Craft talk. I will get to it. We're about to get to tight ends. And honestly, I'm pretty torn on what to do with the tight ends. I sort of have this feeling like the tight ends are going to do well, but I don't really see anything in the numbers to. Is it possible to win without what, Ariel? I don't know the question. All right. What's up, Jameson? Good to see you. All right. Tight end talk. Let's talk about the tight ends. So the top projected tight end is Sam Laporta. Coming off his 2 touchdown game, he has seen an increase in target share recently. He's 5,600. He projects actually not that poorly. He's like one of the stronger point per dollar values on the slate. In the flex spot, Sam Laporta coming in at 26% ownership. At captain, Sam Laporta coming in at 5% ownership. I was planning on fading Laporta. The ownership is now coming in lighter than it was earlier in the day. I don't have any major issue with getting to Laporta at these numbers. I'm going to go back to full season, and we can look at let's look at the game log here for just Sam Laporta to start. The past 3 weeks, 5 targets, 6 targets, and 6 targets. Prior to those 3 weeks, his season high was 6 targets in a game. So clearly the target share has come up recently for Sam Laporta. Also over 70% rep participation each of the past 2 games. That's kind of an outlier relative to like his average on the year. So something has happened where they're starting to like Sam Laporta a bit again. It's tough. I'm not like overly enthusiastic about it because the price has come up enough. We have Jameson Williams active for this one. I don't see any like reason for the increase in usage for Sam Laporta. I guess maybe Khalif Raymond plays some factor there, but I don't really think it's anything to do with Khalif Raymond. And it's not like the targets are like he's getting 10, he's just getting 5 or 6 per game. And he's not that cheap. I kind of think it's just a meh. Like I'm probably gonna be with the field. 5% captain ownership seems fine, not a huge priority to me. 26% projected ownership of the flex seems kind of fine. He's 5,600. Let's take a look at the schedule adjusted. I don't think it's a great spot for tight ends, but it is as you can see here, a slightly above average spot for tight ends against Green Bay's defense. Yeah, honestly, I don't see any reason to take any huge stand here on Sam Laporta. If you like him, I think he looks fine. The ownership is low enough that I'm not like opposed to it. Packers defense, my notice, has allowed the 14th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to tight ends over the past 5 weeks. So totally average matchup. You know, the price is kind of right. The field looks like they are about right on. I'm not taking any major stand on Sam Laporta. Wish I could give you anything better than that as far as analysis goes, but kind of just seems fine. Like the field is playing it about right at about 31% total ownership on Sam Laporta. On the other side, we have actually no, sorry. Let's talk about so Brock Wright projected for about 2 fantasy points at 3,000. Just a very classic. Like if he scores a touchdown, you'll probably wish you had Brock Wright in your lineup. If he does not, you probably don't want 2,000. Like he probably needs to score a touchdown to pay off his price tag at 2,000. He's not going to have like 5 receptions in a game. Just one target last week on 25% route participation for Brock Wright. The week prior to that, 22.5% route participation, 2 targets in that game. He's not like a big splash play guy. You kind of need a touchdown. He's the classic backup tight end. If he scores a touchdown, then you'll probably want him in your lineup. Not even necessarily at 2,000. You might need a couple catches plus a touchdown, but only 3% owned. Is he 3,000? Is that right? Man, yeah, he's too expensive. 3,000, 3% ownership, just a tournament dart throw, where you're really hoping for a touchdown and 3 catches for 20 yards is kind of what you're hoping for out of $3,000 Brock Wright, and that probably pays it off if you get that. Even like a 5-yard touchdown might not be enough for Brock Wright at $3,000 in this game. So I'm not super enthusiastic about it, but because he's only getting 3% ownership, I'd say he's a fine tournament dart throw, not one that I'm even going to force in. Like I'm not going to be overweight to 3%. Certainly if I got to 3%, I would probably just say, okay, fine. Like, but I won't even try to force 3% with Brock Wright. And then Zylstra, yeah, just even more of a dart throw, even less likely to hit, but less ownership. Not enthusiastic about that either. On the other side, Tucker Kraft clearly leading the way for the tight ends in Green Bay. I mean, he was even before Luke Musgrave went down, but particularly since Luke Musgrave went down, the role has been pretty strong for Tucker Kraft, just running tons of routes. I will read off. Actually, no, let's take a look at the ownership. Tucker Kraft coming in at 23% projected ownership in the flex. He's 5,400, so slightly less expensive than Sam Laporta, getting slightly less ownership than Sam Laporta. At captain, Tucker Kraft coming in at 3% ownership. So again, lower ownership than Sam Laporta. He probably should be coming in at lower ownership than Sam Laporta. But again, I'm not really seeing, I have no issue with the ownership that he's getting. Like he has a pretty strong role, 68% route participation last week for Tucker Kraft. He also saw 6 targets in that game. Actually, I'm just going to sort by Kraft. 6 targets last week on 68%. The week prior to that, just 2 targets, but 84% route participation. 85% the week prior to that, just 1 target. There was a period early on when he was looking like he was going to break out and be a stud tight end. 7 targets, 5 targets, 4 targets. And then it's just been not that great of a role recently. It's not the best matchup in the world with Detroit. Let's see. Fourth fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game, 2 tight ends over the past 4 weeks. So I'm not super enthusiastic about Tucker Kraft. I think it's probably right that he is coming in lower owned than Sam Laporta at a lower price tag. I might even come in underweight to where he's coming. I think it's largely fine, but if I end up with just like 20% total exposure to Tucker Kraft, I'm probably okay with that. He's a tight end, probably a little bit more likely than your typical wide receiver to see a target in the end zone, but he's expensive. I think he looks fine. Daniel says, really like Kraft here. Could you see him turn into a short yardage guy with Dobbs out? Price seems right and ceiling's still there. The ceiling's definitely still there. If you want to take a stand on Kraft, I have no issue with it. I'm just not like, I don't see any reason to be super enthusiastic about it since he is getting some ownership. Like he's not super cheap. He's not super unowned. I think he's just kind of right where he should be in terms of ownership. And then Daniel's asked if Jacobs goes down. Yeah, this is what I was saying earlier. I don't really know. My expectation would be Emmanuel Wilson would be the next guy up, but it'd probably be a split between Wilson and Brooks if something happened to Jacobs would be my guess. But I think the bigger increase in usage would go to Emmanuel Wilson. But I'm just speculating. I don't really have any great read there. All right. Any other tight ends we need to talk about? Ben Sims, John Fitzpatrick, just backup tight ends who I guess you could throw into your player pool in a 150 set, but really only for the largest field GPPs. What are they even doing last week for the Packers? Ben Sims, 3 routes, 0 targets. Fitzpatrick didn't play last week, apparently, or didn't run a route last week. The week prior, 3 routes run, 1 target. They're just, you need a touchdown. Otherwise, you're not going to want them in your lineup, most likely. But, fine as dart throws in large field, like very large field contests. I think that does it for the tight ends. So let's move on, look at kickers and defenses. All right. Would you use 2 tight ends in a DK lineup? I mean, sure, I have no issue with using 2 tight ends, even from the same team, but I don't see either of these as teams where I really love like 2 tight ends from either of these 2 teams. But yeah, you can play both. Is tonight the night Stonehands Wicks can catch? We can dream. We can dream that one day Wicks will start catching again. All right, defenses and kickers. In the flex, Jake Bates coming in at 14% ownership. I mean, I'll be way overweight on 14% Jake Bates. This should be a high scoring game. They're in a dome. He's a really good kicker. UFL superstar, Jake Bates. Yeah, he is expensive, but I think he's totally worth that price tag. So yeah, if he's coming in at 14% owned, I'll definitely be overweight to Jake Bates. Brandon McManus, 15% ownership. Similarly, I like him quite a bit. I think I prefer Bates out of the 2 of them. He's coming in lower owned, but I think both of them are spots that I want to be overweight to the kickers. Lions defense coming in at 12%. Again, really strong defense. They are banged up, so maybe some concern there, but it's a home game. They should get up for it. They're 4,600, so kind of expensive, but not like 5,800. Reasonably priced, I would say. I probably come in a little bit overweight to 12%. And then Packers defense, 12% ownership, 3,800. I probably come in overweight. So all of the kickers and defenses look pretty good to me. If I were to prioritize them, it would be the kickers first. It would be Jake Bates first, Brandon McManus second, probably Lions defense third, Packers defense fourth. So just kind of in the order that they are projected. The defenses I go back and forth, but I think pretty clearly Jake Bates is my favorite of the kickers and defense. I think he looks phenomenal at 14% ownership. That's a spot that I'd probably want to be maybe even double the field if he comes in at 14% owned. I don't know that I buy that he's going to come in that low owned. Maybe because we have enough like value options that he could. But this is like where I might end up with a good amount of mid-range plays because I really like, Watson and Reed and Jamo and the kickers. So this might be a slate where I end up more balanced than I often do. And then at captain, just want to look at it. Jake Bates coming in at 1% owned. I think I don't hate him at captain. I could see a 5-6 field goal game here with like tough defenses and good offenses. Lions defense 1% owned, Packers 1%. Like none of these and 1%. So all the kickers and defenses getting about 1%. I think that's fine. I'm probably not gonna do it to like force them into many of my lineups, but I think those all look like pretty reasonable numbers. I'll look briefly now at FanDuel. After looking at FanDuel, I'm going to play around with lineups. I'll check back in on any questions you guys have, and then I'll get out of here to make my own lineups. At MVP, Jordan Love, Jared Goff getting the most ownership. I think they probably should. Both are like they're not that expensive. They have the best projections on the slate on FanDuel. It's only half PPR. You need your highest scoring player to be in the MVP spot on FanDuel, and neither of them getting that crazy high ownership. So, like if I were to play one lineup, I don't know that I would put a quarterback in there, but I think they're both like if I played 10 lineups, I would have at least one share of each quarterback at MVP. I think they look both pretty good and reasonably owned here. Josh Jacobs, 13%, no real issue with that. As far as like favorites, if you want to go contrarian at MVP on FanDuel, I do think Jameson Williams looks pretty good at 3% ownership. Reed to some extent. Watson at just 2%. I like that quite a bit on FanDuel. At just 10,000, that would be like, obviously contrarian. It's not going to hit that often, but I think more often than 2%. Great matchup here. He clearly has the ability to break a slate. So I really like Christian Watson at 2% on FanDuel. Again, think you go to kickers and defense is probably even more viable on FanDuel, just because you don't get a full point per reception. So that Jake Bates looks pretty good as a super contrarian MVP on FanDuel. That's probably the weirdest you need to get. But I think this is a slate where I would be pretty flat, and the field is too in terms of ownership at MVP. But you can get down to, I mean, if you want to go Wicks, I think that's fine. I do prefer just going to Watson there at MVP. But Wicks, I think, is a totally fine option there. The kickers, the defense is reasonable. Dave Montgomery, just 7%. Like we have enough like pretty strong options that I would be pretty spread out if I were playing a lot of lineups on FanDuel today. And then at flex on FanDuel, again, quarterbacks getting ownership. I think that's warranted. JMO just 22% looks pretty good. Watson just, 19%. Just give me all the Watson on FanDuel, both at MVP and in the flex. I think he looks great. Jake Bates, again, 14% looks good on FanDuel. Detroit, 13%. If you want to go super contrarian at flex, let's see. Tim Patrick, just 9% ownership. Looks really good at 8,000. Yeah. But yeah, Christian Watson just really stands out to me on FanDuel, particularly because he's not a big PPR guy and it's not really a PPR site. Like you're getting it through yardage and touchdowns more so than receptions on FanDuel. So I think Watson just stands out as a great play there on FanDuel. Just making sure I'm in the right spot here because I'm going to go back here and make my lineups in a minute. All right, now I'm going to play around with making lineups here on DraftKings, but just going to check in real quick first, make sure I'm not missing any questions. Let's see. Agree with you, Daniels. I like both the kickers. Does the way the Lions go for it on fourth down hurt Bates? Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. Like the fact that they are aggressive going for it on fourth down, but they still like he's had plenty of opportunities. They're so good at getting down close, like on the Packer side of the field, that like even though they do go for it aggressively, he should still have significant opportunities. But yeah, I mean that is a good note that like they are pretty aggressive. That obviously hurts the kicker to some extent, but he's still like he looks really like a strong play to me. I don't think that leaving 200 on the table is too much for single entry, depending on how big the single entry contest is, and depending on how much you like your lineup, but not necessarily. Good luck tonight, crutches. I can't play. Daniel says, "Yeah, I can't play kicker or captain. Too many studs." Fair enough. There are a lot of good options there. Watson's ownership in captain flex on DraftKings, it was like 4% in the captain spot and 26% or something. Let's see. 26% in the flex, 4% at captain. Yep, nailed it. So yeah, pretty low own there. You're welcome, hockey freak. All right, let's make a couple lineups real quick, and then I'm going to go get to making my own. All right, so I'm gonna throw in a Christian Watson just because I think it's kind of fun. Watson at captain. Since I have him there, I'm just going to throw Love in there. You don't have to. That's one way to get unique is to not throw Love in there. But let's just to save time and thought, let's throw Love into the lineup. I'm going to throw JMO in there on the other side. Maybe a Montgomery. Now we have 75.50 left per player. Now, man, if I go Bates, then I have enough to throw in a Jacobs or a Goff. Now maybe if I just go, now I go double Detroit running back with Gibbs, and I'm leaving 900 on the table. So you've got Jordan Love, Christian Watson, just like wheels up for those two. On the other side, on Detroit, you have both running backs, JMO and Jake Bates, leaves 900 on the table. I think this could work for a large field GPP. It looks pretty good to me. I'll do one more, and then I'm out of here. Who else do I want to try at captain? Let's try a Gibbs captain lineup. with Gibbs. We'll throw in, let's put Wicks in there. Tim Patrick. So now we have a lot of money left over. I could throw Montgomery in here. I'm gonna hold off on throwing Montgomery in here. I'll throw in Jayden Reed for this one. Now we're leaving plenty of salary on the table, so I can play Amon-Ra, and then I could play Jacobs if I want to. I do have 2, and if you want to include Gibbs, 3 Detroit running backs. So this one makes sense to throw Goff in there. That looks fine to me. Leaves 1,500 on the table. Gibbs at MVP with Tim Patrick, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jared Goff on the Packers side. Jayden Reed and Dontavian Wicks leaves 1,500 on the table. I think this looks like a viable large field lineup as well. So there you have it. All right. Dan says Neil's going to clear 10 minutes ago, first time ever. Yeah, that's the goal. Yeah, I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate all of you for hanging out with me. If you have not already done so, please do subscribe to the channel. Yeah, nice try, El Bum. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, commenting, all of that, very helpful as I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. Appreciate you all hanging out here. I will be back on Sunday night for the Sunday night football game. I'll catch you guys later. Thanks and good luck tonight.